So I had very specific thoughts when I signed up to do this. I said, sure, I'll do this, and I will kind of lean the conversation away from renewables. And as life tends to do, I got in a situation where renewable energy became personal to me, and it caused me to have to think about what really goes into renewable energy. And I haven't changed my mind completely, but there's a lot of context that needs to go into these decisions. It's a big decision for a producer to go down this road. It's scary. It's, in some cases, it's a lifetime worth of changes on your landscape. And that can be a big change and a big weight on your shoulder, especially if you're a multi-generation to be the one to change the landscape forever. So these conversations are just that. They're meant to be conversational. This is not a lecture. This is meant for people who are thinking about going through the process. Even people who have adamant opinions about it already, feel free to speak up one way or the other. This is a conversation topic. We have a couple of questions that have come in from Facebook already. I hope that you feel free to stand up, speak your mind, ask any questions. You should not leave here without knowing everything you want to know about renewable energy. The first question is, we're going to lean on the lawyer pretty heavily. How do these contracts typically look? What should we be looking at when getting into this?
We're on here. Okay. A lot of times they don't look so great to start with. They don't have, all the provisions that you want, but it's pretty, fortunately, the way it's geared and that you'll get it most of the time is there's a term sheet. And sort of to equate it to something we might be familiar with, like an oil and gas lease, where, hey, I want to know what my bonus is up front and sort of the other three core terms. With a renewable lease, you want to make sure that you can get there on basically the price that they're going to pay you during the option period, because usually there's anywhere from a 1 to 5 year option period, then during the construction period, and then during operations. And then how long is the contract going to be? And is it going to increase by a set 2% per year, or are we going to tie it to CPI? What are we doing there? Also, maybe we start talking about, is there going to be a bond? What's the reclamation going to be? If we can't get past that, then we don't need to waste any time worrying about restoration provisions or, can I do agrivoltaic grazing? Because a lot of times it's like you said, you were transforming a family land that's been managed a certain way for decades, generations, and in order to do that, there's got to be a significant price movement.
So in order to have a really good conversational talk here, can you break that down even further into some bullet points? That was a lot of information. Yeah. Can you talk about like the five red flags of a contract?
So I'd say number one, price. The number two that I'd be looking at would be, I always go back to who's your partner on this, especially if it's land that you're looking to retain. Because all right, one, am I going to try to do agrivoltaic grazing on it? So in that case, I'm going to be interacting with them daily rather than just depositing a check. Also, it's worth, now there are enough different companies out there that have been doing this long enough to get some of them competing against each other on it and really flesh out the deal and find out who's actually going to be able to build the project. There's a statistic going around that only 25% of the land that's signed up at an option for renewables actually gets built. It all goes back to transmission capacity. A lot of times where we're building this in more rural areas, that line, we only can get so much energy coming out of there before the line's full, and then they're having to come in and put in a new, transmission line in order to get it back to the load center. And so that's something else to consider is, all right, hey, do I just want to put an option on this and get $50-ish per acre per year and hope this thing solar lease on wind, it's way less for the option period, like closer to say around $5 per acre per year. Difference is wind, you're signing up all your acreage, whereas solar, you're only signing up the acreage that they can actually build a solar project on. So a lot of times on a wind contract, they'll come in and look at it. Okay, they won't get specific and carve out, areas where they know they're not gonna put a tower, they just want to take it all. Solar, not the case, again, because they're paying so much more, it's very specific. So we've got, all right, can you actually build it? And then after that, that's when I really just say, okay, we're either gonna do this or we're not, and then I start negotiating the contract.
Go ahead.
You mentioned an increase on the lease rate. Is that something that's industry standard?
Can you make sure you repeat the question?
Yeah, so if I understood your question, you were asking about an increase in the lease price.
Yeah, you said CPI or 2% a year. Is that standard?
Standard, we're seeing it go up, especially, CPI's gone up the last couple of years. We've been able to push on, and then in some cases get closer to 3%.
Thank you.
One of the reasons I get to host Steve is because I am not afraid to ask them questions. What is CPI?
Consumer Price Index, so basically inflation. Thank you.
Do you see any these that have renegotiation? I know our oil and gas, we have mandatory every 5 years. There is renegotiation on prices because things can drastically change. I think inflation's way above 2%.
Absolutely, yeah. You can. So sorry. So the question was, can you get the option to renegotiate it every 5 years? And yeah, you can put in a lease, whatever they'll let you put in a lease. So definitely something that we try to put in. We rarely get, but when we can, it's a solid metric to have.
One of the things to remember is that if you want to put something in a lease, they're going to want something in return. So if you want to be able to renegotiate it every 5 years, then that's going to go both ways, and it might not go well for you, depending on the price of power and those types of things. So that's what we found as we were negotiating with the different companies, and that's as much as I know. I'll defer to the attorney because I feel strongly that you have to have a good attorney looking over all of these leases.
Brett, while you have the microphone, you talk about what you put into place on your ranch and then your first steps, how you made that decision to go forward with it or not go forward with it.
Okay, well, the question was what went into our ranch and how we made the decision to go forward. We have we have windmills on property that my dad owns, and I had windmills built on property that I owned. And then we did sign a solar lease that didn't go anywhere. We did too good a job of creating sage grouse habitat, and they wouldn't let us take it back. So the solar lease didn't go anywhere. How we made the decision to go forward, it was a kind of a complicated iterative process that just involved money. How much are you going to give me? What's it going to be worth? And what am I going to give up? So for the windmills, obviously they have a higher profile. They affect the view shed. Fortunately for us, that was on property that is far away from us and doesn't really affect our view. Our neighbors were critical in making this happen because they needed to be on board. They had more ground around our little piece of ground that was out there kind of in the middle of nowhere that we used for a bull pasture than we did. And so they were critical in making this happen. And I spent a lot of time working with the power company to make sure that they didn't step over $100 bill to save a penny with our neighbors. And my neighbors still haven't thanked me, by the way, but it was a much more difficult decision for them because they live right in the middle of it. And so they had to look at it and say, okay, can we still use it for what we're doing? With wind, the answer was yes. Is it really going to affect our carrying capacity with wind? The answer was not really, not out there, because we're high desert. We're like Nevada, where it takes 10 or 12 or 15 acres to an AUM. So that the footprint wasn't as big a deal. Then it became an issue of quality of life. Is this going to be worth? Is the financial trade-off worth the quality of life trade-off? And for them, they negotiated a kind of U-shed corridor where they live right next to the mountain, and they could see, that when they looked out their window, they didn't see windmills. They could still see the mountain. And then for the solar, it was just a function of what am I going to give up again for what I'm going to get, and again the footprint didn't use up a lot of carrying capacity, so I wasn't giving up a lot there. It didn't provide any access issues or barriers for me. That was something else that I looked at. And then over for both projects, you've got to kind of figure the price of the land in with it, because without with solar or wind on your property, you got to kind of figure that the footprint area is valued at zero if you ever decide to sell the ranch, and that there is even more effect on value with wind if you decide to sell the ranch. So there is that consideration as well. So those are the things that we considered, and I'm an economist, so it was right down my alley. Boy, I was in heaven. I got to open more spreadsheets. So but yeah, that's what we did.
What was the scale of the solar project?
Do you remember, Jack?
I asked what the scale of the solar project was that he was considering or willing to move forward with.
I think it was, it was around 1,000 acres.
Around 1,000 acres. Okay,
Yeah.
wow. All right.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot, but it runs like 4 cows. So,
Stretch it.
Yeah.
One of the things you said in there that scared me a little bit on the sage grouse part, you said they would like.
Well,
And I read too much.
yeah, Jack, you're more an expert on.
So I actually worked for the power company on Brett's. Brett and I worked together on our things. We overlapped here. There was a sage grouse habitat designation, a prime habitat, that was what we believed, looking on the ground, was incorrectly drawn, because you see exactly where the soil changed. And where Brent was looking to put the solar in was alkali, nothing. But he said to run 4 cows there, he couldn't run it all. It was not giving up. It really wasn't giving up 4 AUMs grazing, because it was alkali wash. The sage grouse weren't there, but the challenge was the negotiation over 400 feet of whether this line had been drawn on the west side of the power corridor or the east side of the power corridor was not stop the whole project. And the challenge was there was no one willing to sit down and have a logical discussion, because as soon as you put the soil map down and went to the field, you went, oh, they drew it right here. You can see it from space. But in the agency GIS system, was on the wrong side of the transmission corridor. So a simple thing stopped a fairly large project.
And just to add to that, if anybody's a researcher, I would like to see the research. I would like to see a research project done, and I would have liked to do it with our solar project on the effect on the Lex. If you build solar in a core habitat area, because obviously you're kind of getting the impression that we don't get a lot of rain, and so, you know, we're in a 7-inch precip area, which means that all the rain off of all of those solar panels is going to run right into the ground, and you know, a 1/2 inch of rain on the ground is a big deal to us in the spring. So if you double that up by putting solar panels up and having that run out onto the ground and spread out onto the ground, you're going to have more cover in between those solar panels than you would outside of the project area, which means, you know, potentially you could actually improve the habitat for sage grouse. And so just throwing that out there in case anyone wants to, you know, submit a grant for a research project. I've got a place for you to do it.
We've got to take a break.
So that's a great idea. We do need more research on that, but there is research happening that is trying to answer your exact scenario. And we are learning. So I am currently working on an agrivoltaics research project. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to Silicon Ranch, who is a solar developer in the United States. And Silicon Ranch has taken on the task of being a demonstration for agrivoltaics with sheep grazing specifically. And so what we are learning is exactly what you're intuitively thinking about, is that the grid that the solar panels create, you know, the rows of panels, is actually distributing or redistributing water in a pretty predictable way. And then that, of course, is affecting carbon dynamics as well as plant productivity and potentially plant species composition, you know, patterns across the array. So if you think of an arid systems, one of the a few of the trends that we're seeing in the data, not just in our study, but in other studies in Colorado and in other regions, Minnesota, Arizona, are seeing that the panel, the canopy, even though it's a synthetic canopy, it's not trees, right? It's not a live canopy, but even still, we're seeing the research coming back saying that there is, under those solar arrays, there's reduced evapotranspiration rates. So you're retaining your water. There's increased soil moisture rates under the panels, reduced soil temperature. So the panels are helping keep the temperature cool, which in some regions of the world might not be an issue, but in some regions that could improve your productivity or improve maybe the establishment of cool seasons where maybe climate change is creating challenges for cool season. Abundance compared to warm season grasses like in the eastern plains of Colorado. And so we're learning things, and I would say as a resource, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in NREL has an incredible database available to the public. They've categorized, they've reviewed the literature and put it into very searchable categories on their website. If you just search Inspire database, or NREL as an acronym, Inspire database, you will find that database, and you can word search different things. It's a great resource. But
there are two things that you might want to comment on, or you want to. Okay, so two things that came up that I thought when you were speaking is, one, with these projects, it's got to be economical, and so they they basically, what the solar, renewable developer is paying, it's all backloaded instead of front loaded. So it's not like an oil and gas lease where they come in and they pay you a couple $1,000 bonus up front, and then they've got their expenses afterwards. It's pretty $5 an acre for an option on wind, $50 an acre per year for an option on solar. That's not significant, and so they can promise you the world up front. And oh yeah, we'll do it all, and then they come back to you in 3 years and they're like, hey, it's not economical for us to build this project because right, you've already like cashed that check in your mind. I did a solar carbon storage, which is different, but it's how I relate to it. And I was like, man, we're not gonna store any carbon. I'm not cashing that whopping $70,000 check in my mind. Oh, that next year, I was like, yeah, we got $70,000 coming in. Like, you start banking on it. So even though you're think like, oh, it's not gonna, I can do without this money. We didn't have it before. I promise you, when it comes that next year, you're like, yeah, I need my check. So then when they come to you and they say, oh, hey, by the way, this project's not economical, even though we promised you, $1,000 an acre per year during operations, we can only pay you $700. Then your option is, okay, well, either I tell them no and they go away, and I can go try to renegotiate with another group, but that other group's gonna have at least 2 or 3 years lead time. So, and then they're just gonna be paying me back the $50 option payment, or do I just get sort of punched in the face and agree to this lesser payment? So it's just important to know that, like you said, when you're discussing with them and you're like, oh yeah, like, I'm gonna get incredible terms up front. And they're the ones with the money on the deal. The other thing, one other thing we do negotiate that's always good is renewable contracts are really good about paying attorney's fees. And they've just been broke to lead on that from the beginning. So going into it, it's just, hey, you're gonna cover my attorney's fees. If y'all want, and if they push back, it's just, well, you should have given us a contract and we can sign without the attorney.
That's a great point. But before we start agreeing to cash $70,000 checks, I want to take it back a little more basic. I don't know anybody that's thinking or has gone through the process without first having been courted by a company. And Luke, I was wondering if you could tell me about, do people come to you with proposals, or do you come to them? How does this work?
It's been both ways, honestly. Renewables can be a tricky item for siting specifically on property. There's mentioned you need the transmission component there to make the numbers work right for the energy project itself. And you need the resource either from the solar side or from the wind side. You're going to need a decent wind study to understand. So it has happened both ways. We've done it where it's both either private or public lands or a mixture of both. So it really does. Each case, it's not much of an answer for it, but it works both ways.
Fair enough. While you got the mic, can you talk a little bit about how the contracts work from your side? I don't know what you too much on stuff, but we've heard the other side. What's the contract like for you? How negotiable are they?
Yeah, I think this has been a really good discussion that brings to light some items here. There are a lot of different players in the space, and there's a lot of different, say, quality of firms. Not all of them are your A+ firms. So there will be entities that come in whose sole business purpose is to lock up options or leases under terms that perhaps sound really attractive to landowners up front. And then they flip them to somebody else. They sell their rights and they'll get down the road a ways. And it turns out sometimes those contracts are completely financeable by those who really have their part in the project. Right? So just say, ensure that you know the counterparty then make sure you get straight answers and you do your research on the financial viability, how long these entities typically are involved with these projects and their execution strategy. So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind with that. When we approach landowners or come into these conversations with them, we are looking at this from through a few different lenses. One, the project's gotta make sense for our company financially, for it to, go for it for us. Two, it's gotta make financial sense for the landowner, obviously. You mentioned, is it worth both the economics of the numbers of that land and also the utilization of that land and the service of that land, whether it's view shed or however you're valuing that parcel. And you can break it down from there. Okay, how do we put a dollar value on that? Does that work with the company? Does that work with the landowner? And from there, what are the other aspects of this arrangement that could be beneficial to both entities? Right? Are there improvements to the range to the private parcel? If it's an irrigated parcel, what improvements could the company bring to the table here that might also be value to the operation of that family or that agricultural family? When we step into this, our goal from our company's perspective, my perspective, we're looking to keep working Rangeland's working, right? That's the goal. Both of us have to come out of this deal with something positive.
Question right there.
Are these companies, are they willing to negotiate like a term in their lease where they can transfer without the landowner's permission for assignment? Or is that something they do not want to see?
Some companies will. We don't generally like to do that because if you're starting to aggregate a number of different parcels together for a larger project, if you happen to have a neighbor that down the road has the link to the transmission network across this land, and he doesn't agree to an assignment, it might kill the entire deal and take out the whole project. So those are often hard to finance when you have landowners that retain a right to refuse an assignment.
I really appreciate that answer because you could have said it depends and I would like you. Thank you.
So the assignment's always a great part of a contract, and a couple of workarounds for it, because obviously you as a landowner, you want to know who's on your property. It's like, hey, these guys were great, they courted me, we had a great relationship, all of a sudden now you just flipped it to somebody. What do I do? So you can work in some provisions, like they have to be have X number of dollars in assets and done X number of projects, over $50 million type stuff. What's really interesting about the renewable space is the financing for it. And you don't see that so much in some of your other contracts, but they've got all those bankers have to be able to basically have a loan on the equipment. And so they don't want you coming with the assignment provision. And that's where you see some push. It just doesn't work in that space.
Just on a follow up on that, I saw one solar farm flip 5 times in a row after the guy specifically chose the company being a really reliable company. And he's basically farm tested by the end results. So that's where he is.
Yeah, so that brings things to me, in my mind, back to the ecology of this, and this is where I really had a hard stance on renewables. And it was clear to me from the get-go that it's disturbance on the landscape is you're not going to get back. And as this project's become more applicable to me, it's become more of a it's justify the needs. The money that comes in from that renewable project will keep 300,000 other acres really well managed all the time. But when it comes to the reclamation of the pond, that's where my ears stand up a little bit. And first, can somebody explain what bonding is and how that works?
Basically, when they walk away from the project and say we're bankrupt, there's a big pile of money over here to say, don't worry, we have our pile of money to come fix it with. So the way it works in, anybody else want to comment on that before?
That's bonding.
Yeah.
Okay, so the important distinction though with it is a lot of times you'll see on these projects that there's a salvage value. And that's, well, in year 2, these turbines or these panels are brand new, and so they're worth a lot. Well, 2 considerations. One, it's like a car, the second you drive it out a lot. The technology's improved, and this, I want you to step in if I'm saying it.
And can you guys hold the microphones close to your mouth?
The technology is improving so rapidly in both the wind and in the solar space that there's not as much value. It's like a battery powered car 10 years ago compared to now. It's just, they don't even play. The other, so it doesn't, what's on your land doesn't have as much value. The other thing is that if they are walking the project, probably a bankruptcy. So that banker's got, hey, this is his collateral on the deal. And so when they say, oh yeah, this is the solar panels or the wind turbines are gonna be, that's what's we're gonna put up to finance the reclamation. You need to make sure that that is net of whatever interest the bankers have in there. And that the value that we're assigning to that infrastructure is in real time with its actual depreciated value, and not just some pie in the sky number. And so then you get this group, all right, you gotta put up a bond and then it's there. After bonding, I think there's some important part on the reclamation we want to discuss too.
For sure. I just want to clear up on, I hear some people talking about wanting to make sure they're self-bonded because they don't trust the bond that's in place. Is that a reasonable fear? Is it overinflated?
If you can get it negotiated, absolutely. I'd love to have that, but I don't typically see it.
Never did. I've never done them.
Go ahead.
So I think this is what you're talking about, but if they go bankrupt, and I mean, is there any way to commit them to removing everything they've installed on the property or decommissioning plans standard in the industry?
Let the attorney talk to enforceability post bankruptcy.
So you go bankrupt, they're gonna be, somebody's gonna end up holding the bag on those assets usually. Sure, you can try to get it done, but that's really what the bond's there for. And now we see, I'm not sure about other states, but Texas at least passed a basic statute that requires minimum terms from these companies in order to reclaim both, so you're not left with a bunch of skeleton turbines or panels out on your property. But yeah, at the end of the day, you could be sitting there with a defunct project for a couple of years while it's tied up in litigation.
Just one quick answer. I've been on the technical advisory committee for Puget Sound Energy's Wild Horse Energy Facility for the last 15 years. They've been running since 2007, I think. I think it's about 170 turbines. And they, I think they can't get an MSEC license without a decommissioning plan. And it's bonded for what the expected cost would be.
That'd be FSEC scale.
Say again.
That would be at the scale that they'd have to have FSEC approval. There's a lot of smaller scale projects.
Could somebody unacronym that?
Energy facilities citing something. Was there another acronym I missed? Yeah.
It was only like a big.
Okay.
I had a question about, so we just went through the inquiry in Alberta. There was a few companies that proposed bonds to be increased in value over the life of the project. And then there was a bit debate about cash up front versus, is there, I guess, and this is from both sides, from the industry versus ranch, what is kind of the challenges of financing bonding? Because that can be a lot of upfront cost to companies as well. And is there a better, what is the best solution?
I think it's going to be company dependent, depending on if your power company is a very large, investor-owned utility with a very large capital balance sheet, versus one that perhaps doesn't have that large set of assets. That bonding capacity may not be well established for that firm. So, depending on who your counterparty is, you probably need to have a little bit open mind as to what is that financial security, what is the form of it.
Is this business old enough? Does it have enough history to look to any failed projects and see what became of the bonding and the reclamation? Reclamation is something that that's really all given. in this doctor. If nobody wants to,
I don't know, there's a lot of reclamation on strip mining and oil and gas development that has taken place, so and the footprints aren't really all that different. So if you, you know, if you're familiar with reclamation from, fossil fuel development, then, or any type of strip mining, then, it's the same. It's gonna be the big, I think the big, concern is leaving, and from a landowner's perspective, is the one thing we wanted to make sure we had ironclad was that once this project's done, everything you put on the place leaves. And you know, because we didn't want to have to deal with any DEQ or EPA issues from you know, old solar panels or wind turbines or whatever. And but that's not any different than oil and gas development. So I think it's pretty similar. The one thing, and I think I'm sure that that's what you were alluding to is making sure that the company you're working for has a bond in place, and that's the big thing. Is you know, making sure there is a surety bond in place, and that that you have talked with the consultant who understands how big that surety bond needs to be.
You know, you were pointing to mine and oil and gas lease. I mean, up front, everything's going great. You know, it's at the tail end when somebody's left holding the bag. And you just want to make sure that if you're an active, involved landowner and you're checking in with the company and they know that you're paying attention, you're going to sense it, you're going to pick up if there's something's going wrong, and you're going to be able to jump in and probably get it fixed. Whereas if it's just, if you have absentee property and you just show up at year 50 and expect it to all be cleaned up, yeah, right. So, you know, I think it's no different than anything that you deal with. Just if you're involved and you pay attention, it's probably not going to turn into as much of a horror story. And you know, you just, again, it comes back to the conversation when you got to look at the dollars. I mean, there are plenty of horrible stories with oil and gas, and you still do that, or mining, you name it. And it's just, you got to look at where you are on that property and what the opportunities are. And you talked about it being, you know, potentially, and I think this, we all visited about this for a minute. We're all here, Society for Range Management, right? So you know, we're not here because we want to go, because we woke up, you know, being like, oh, I can't wait to go develop, you know, my rangeland, turn my pastures into, you know, renewable projects. But when you look at in life, you just got to prioritize. And if I was looking at a piece of property on Saturdays, can't afford it. But there's a potential to stack some solar and wind on it. Now I can. So if I do that on a corner of the property, you know, and then, but then it goes back to the reclamation part. Okay, so if you let them come in and on a solar project, or even, you know, wind, and just make a mess of it and destroy all the, not have a thought out plan. It all goes back with wind. You want to see what that infrastructure plan is, where they're siting those facilities. On solar, if there's some solar projects that they want to come down and they want to put limestone down on them so that they can clear all the native vegetation off, put limestone or something else. So, because they're two-sided solar panels, so that they can catch the sun rays on both sides. Okay, well, you're not growing anything on that. Also, there's some projects that they don't want to mess with vegetation management, so they want to blade it all off. But if you can negotiate a contract, if you care about rangeland restoration, what it's going to look like on the back end, you can negotiate a contract where they're going to be as minimally invasive as possible to that soil. And so they're not going to change those soil horizon. They're not going to put any chemicals down. And then it's going to get replanted in natives and you're gonna have that vegetation management contract, and you're gonna get to do agrivoltaic grazing on it. And, oh, by the way, there are a lot of specifics you wanna negotiate, like, you wanna have that conversation on the front end. You don't wanna come in at the end like, oh, hey, I'm gonna graze my sheep. Because, no, you're not. The panels will be set too low, the wires won't be right, it's not gonna work. But if you plan that out, you know, always begin with the end in mind, plan that out on the front end. And you can do that, and you can put beehives out there, and I forget what it's called when you have bees with, solar.
Pollinator habitat.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and so you can do all that, and that starts to be like, okay, cool, this is something we can make work. Go look at those pictures we have of, you know, downtown Los Angeles or Spindletop in Texas in 1902 after they hit oil. It was oil deck after oil deck across here, oil flowing down. It was the biggest mess. Well, it cleaned up. You can now have, you know, you can drain over 2,000 acres or more from an oil and gas well smaller than this room. So you can do low impact. Same thing on the solar and wind. You can make it happen. You just got to think that way and find a partner that wants to make that happen.
Just a quick comment about wind energy. I'm not familiar with solar, but with wind energy, much of that reclamation happens up front because the main footprint is not the turbine tank, which is quite small, plus a light road network, but the bearing transmission lines, because most of the feeder lines coming off the towers going back to the substation are underground. And that all gets reclaimed immediately after they've reburied the transmission lines. So that work's already done. And the footprint of removing the turbines is not a lot of area.
I have a question maybe for Answer Luke. To give us a pulse on the larger industry. What of all the solar developers or companies out there, what percent would you imagine are those companies that are willing to sit at the table, talk about agrivoltaics, talk about ecology, talk about the landscape in a way that's not just money generation? What percent of the industry does that or is willing to do that? I have no idea. That's true.
Just money. I don't.
I just. Yeah, I'm just saying, I don't know. I wish what are we up against kind of a thing, like to make sure we're doing good.
So I think I'll answer that question, kind of the one that I practiced to go with it. But I think there's plenty of shady dealers. In any industry, there's more shady dealers than there are good dealers. You know, in any small town, there's like one good place to buy your pickup and 17 guys who are going to go broke every year. But you know who those 17 are. That's the nature of all businesses. And but you should be, when you start having your negotiations, be able to figure out pretty quickly what they are, because they should be using the language at the beginning of when we go to operations, your ranch will carry more AUMs than it did before than it does currently. Here's how we're going to help you get there. Here are the people we work with that you can choose to work with. This is what Jenny does, this is what I do. Is find somebody who already has a relationship with biologists, whoever, whatever your concerns are. If they don't know what a sage grouse is, you probably don't want them coming to help you negotiate your sage grouse mitigation. If they don't know the difference between HDPE pipe and PVC pipe, you probably don't want them on your ranch. If they're coming, one of the things, so my job, so you know what I'm doing, is I'm almost always in the middle. I occasionally get hired by ranchers, but the industry is shifting to where the burden of bringing in the natural resource consultants are shifting to the power companies, just like the lawyer. It's now, what did you call, you've broken the lead. The good companies are going to say, here's a group of natural resource guys, pick one, and we're going to pay their bill. what I've been told over and over is there's a pot of money. And it doesn't matter how we distribute it out. The guy who's the bean counter for Luke or the bean counter for whoever, he says there's $1 million to do lease, not reclamation, whatever. So as the landowner, you need to figure out what's important to you, cash or reclamation. What I try to work with ranchers to do is say, yeah, you have X amount of cash, but they're gonna have a bunch of heavy equipment here. Get all the heavy equipment work you want done for the next 50 years. Because while he's got your contractor's got 8 D8s on your place, everything you want, because the D8 is gonna cost them nothing per day compared to what it costs you. Figure out all those long-term things. And the other one is, like on the projects there where Brett was, is you have somebody who has the tolerance to go to sage grouse meetings where you would just go ahead and say, I would rather lose the ranch and please burn me alive. You know, somebody who has the tolerance to go to those things, that's the only time that you may have someone that you trust and you like that's willing to go fight a sage grouse battle. Or design a set of troughs. Like, I'd love to have a Temple Grandin, whatever, or I'd love to have the neatest set of troughs. You have access to an engineer that a rancher would never have access to. Like when I work with Luke, I can call one of the guys and I'm amazed at how fast they can do some of the engineering that would take me forever to track something down to do, because that's all they do. So those are the things where you can leverage instead of just having a pot of money. And that's why I choose to work in it, is because I think it provides the opportunity for generational shift, because you're gonna have things you couldn't afford to do. And you should, if you do it well, have a better ranch when operations started than you did. They have money they don't have to make it off the fat of a cow.
Brett, you have a better range than when you started.
Yeah. The question was, do I have a better ranch than when I started? And the answer is yeah, because I sold my piece of property to the power company for, at the present value of the discounted cash flows, which was a lot. And I bought another place. So yeah, I have a better ranch, but it's not the same piece of property.
Brought up a good point there. That's something else. I see it more on the solar leases, especially down in Texas now, but battery storage is a really big thing. And especially, so you basically assume, right? If you're near a transmission line, at this point, they're probably coming to you for solar. If you're near a substation, they're probably looking to put in battery storage. We're seeing battery storage go for $6,000 per acre per year up as a lease, which it's only 10, 20 acres in size, but it's a pretty substantial payment for considering you still get to own it. But a lot of times you'll see these solar leases just, oh yeah, we're paying you $1,000 per acre and we get all those rights lumped in. If you reserve that back, all you do, the more right, my deal is, and what I tell my clients, look, if they're not paying you for that right now, we're not giving. So if they want a battery storage site, great, we'll negotiate. If they say, well, no, we don't want to pay any more for that, great. We'll talk about it. Yes, ma'am.
Some solar companies corporate biodiversity goals. Better after the project. But I did have a question about whether the landowners are typically responsible for not just the erosion control, or is there a down that sort of stuff?
Sorry, to satisfy what control?
Not just heat control or erosion.
No, that should all be on the developer. If the landowner is finding themselves responsible for any of that, one, that just wouldn't be traced back to me. Two, there's something really wrong with the lease. Yes, sir.
When you're talking about reserving rights and whatnot, even like your royalty rate, or however you want to phrase it, it's electricity. How do you know if you're getting a fair deal and it's something new like solar farms, like you alluded to carbon storage earlier, it's brand new. How do you know what a fair market rate is? And you can compare it to your neighbor, but they don't know either.
Yeah, so you asked a great question is, hey, how do we know what's going right? And that was something I meant to add in on when you're negotiating these. Yeah, because everybody goes back to oil and gas, oh, I want a cut of it. And what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, on the renewable side, they're crunching these numbers, they're getting financing. They want as few variables as possible. So, right? And so if you're throwing in, oh, I'm gonna get a royalty of it, well, no, because they don't know what that's gonna be, and that messes up their economic projections. But again, maybe you're just in the sweet spot where they gotta have your country for some renewable project, and you can negotiate that as part of it. What I like to do in that situation is you put the greater of, and we see this a lot in wind leases. So wind leases tend to be the greater of, a certain, either a royalty, a payment per acre, or a payment per megawatt. And on the solar side, you can do the same thing, right? A royalty payment for the electricity, or if it's being sold or generated, or a royalty payment per acre. And that's sort of how you protect yourself against that. You can also try to work in a favored nations provision. Favored nations provision is basically, hey, if somebody else within, you define the area, within 5 miles within the county gets better, you give them better terms, you're going to give me those terms too. I really try not to put it in because I've been so many times when I've been, all right, like, we got this, and I know I've got leverage, like, man, we can't do it. I was like, you agreed to a favored nations provision on another deal, didn't you? Like, yeah. And so when you're putting, have y'all ever done a favored nations? Yeah. Yeah. It's just, you talk about like there's a pot of money and you only get to pick so many things from it. I think there are a lot better things to pick.
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't answer that last question as I think about it as well as I should have. Because I did, I had an opportunity to buy another piece of property and I sold my property with the wind rights to buy that, but that didn't answer the question. Is the grazing still better on wind farm or is it the same? I'd say it's the same. I don't think it's any better because I don't see that they did a lot of improvement, but at the same time, I don't see any. I think the reclamation they did and the seeding they did in the disturbed spots increased the biomass enough to offset the actual footprint. So I think it's about the same. As a matter of fact, I know it is.
I wasn't going to plug you on that. We answer.
Yeah, just a quick comment about the road network and whether or not the range is better. I come from sagebrush country. A lot of people don't know that Eastern Washington is sagebrush country, but where I live, it's 8 to 14 inches of annual precipitation. It's mountainous rangeland. We've had some really big fires where we have enough fuel that it burns hot enough to take out all the sagebrush. And with a hot fire that burns sagebrush all the way down, the sagebrush don't come back. They don't sprout. And if it burns hot enough, it also kills the perennials and they don't come back. And now we've got a moonscape where whatever opportunistic invasive annual grasses are around are going to fill it in. And we've got massive areas of mostly public land where that's happening. And on some of these wind farm projects, the light road network, and by light, I mean, this is not a large percentage of the ground. It's oftentimes rocky ridge tops that otherwise don't have a lot of grass. Those roads are tremendously valuable because they serve as really effective fire breaks. And if a fire did take off, it stops at the road. Furthermore, it's a fire break where the weeds are being controlled
by the wind company and not by the landowner, because they're the ones that use the roads to service the towers. And at least the ones that I'm familiar with, if, you know, if that land sold to somebody else, like state agency, they would keep the road network. Because right now they're really, really scared of wildfire, because it's by far the greatest threat to sage grouse and anything else that's a sagebrush omnivore species in the inner Mountain West for sure.
Got a question for either of y'all. How often do y'all, speaking of wind, how often do y'all find that y'all repower? How often do y'all repower? Is it y'all find you're doing it every 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, it's gonna depend on the contract like EPA for the offtake. I mean, you're seeing, I don't know, 20-year PPAs, sometimes up to 25. And a power purchase agreement from the power company to the utility, purchasing power. And there's a decision at that time of want our repower rights or renewal rights worked into those private land transactions. When you're on public lands, typically you only get a right-of-way grant now for 30 years. So they'll have to go through a full new NEPA evaluation to see if that they can get a reauthorization for it. And technology, as mentioned before, is changing so rapidly. It's going to make much more sense to redeploy a modern turbine or a modern solar panel in those instances. If the market's still there. But, I've been developing power projects for 18 years now. And the technology and what the market has desired has transitioned drastically over those past 18 years. Wind was just starting to be a major player 18 years ago. I was working heavily in fossil fuel 18 years ago. But the marketplace right now, all they want are the cleaner megawatts coming onto the grid. That's what the consumers are asking for. That's what utilities are asking for. That's what the big corporations are asking for. They're the ones driving this demand. So 18 years, 20 years from now, who knows where we're going to be? I think that there's a lot of progress going toward small modular reactors. Honestly, I think there's a lot that can happen over the course of the next 20 years to what this power grid is going to look like.
One question for you all, 18 years, where do y'all end up with, so not on the, probably haven't been, and you're just doing wind, right, on solar? Are you doing solar too?
Where it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the wind side first, have you all had to pull down some of those towers, and if so, what have y'all done with the components?
We haven't been involved in that yet.
I appreciate how honest you've been with your business and everything. I'm not expecting that honesty. What other things can landowners look to for additional income? I'm thinking specifically of water rights for these projects. I'm sure they have some need for water or gravel or some other resource that is on the ranch already. Is that something that's negotiated separately, or we can typically go right up front with the entire agreement?
Oh, that would Dave, let me. That's a lot of that's my job. Is one of the renters that we're working on said, I've started a post. Then he said, now I'm looking at this. The lease is not where the money is. He said, where the money is I can bring my kids back to the ranch because there's so many small business opportunities associated with renewable power. Selling gravel, spraying weeds, erosion control, fence maintenance. I think one of them had a food truck and said the biggest thing that he likes on his ranch is that his grandkids are there all the time because his kids are so busy with the businesses they started associated with the renewal that he gets to drive with his grandkids to go check his cows. So he thinks the wind, that's why he thinks the wind is better.
Is it typical then to see some sort of non-compete clause with the frame business put into it? Or did they just get money?
The reason they're able to get it is because they're right there and they're competing, especially on rural ranches, they're competing against someone like the one I'm thinking of. They're having to buy their erosion control and weed sprayers or driving from Billings, which is 80 miles away. And so he went and bought the equipment for his kids who had a job in Billings to come back. And they compete solely on the travel time. So they're charging full city price with zero travel. So they always.
I have a just for fun question in here, and I will make sure I get to it before we're done. For any of you that have been involved with these contracts, what's the most outlandish thing you've seen asked for by these draw? Anything weird? Because think of a lot of things I want power companies.
Sounds like they're getting the right to decide.
I can mix this with several. Kids ponies. Horses for the kids. That gets named is that they want a horse for their kids. I don't know why they don't just want the money to go buy a horse, but that's somehow becomes one they add for.
This was not an outlandish request, but I would add to the earlier question about whether or not the ranch is better afterwards. In the project that I've been involved with, and I've been involved as a range extension specialist, advocating for the rancher and also participating in some environmental management with the wind company. They redeveloped some old springs that had really, really old infrastructure. And it was something where the rancher never would have done it because of the cost of redeveloping these springs and reinstalling them. So the power company bought the materials, the rancher did the work, they exchanged the labor for simply grazing fees. And if the rancher were here, he would have nothing but good things to say about it. Yeah, that's been a pretty significant benefit. It's been pretty consistent across other ranches in Washington that have had wind farms.
One of the things I encourage ranchers to do when I work with ranchers is to think of something that they wouldn't be able to do. And what I've been working on for the last 2 years is to reach out to the power company and to any of the other partners to bring them into your rural fire protection districts. Is frequently the power company and the associated business don't think of that when they come into the community, but they're coming in with big investment with a lot of things that burn and a big insurance liability, but not the experience of rural fire protection districts, which tend to be rancher run, and ranchers have the opportunity to bring a partner in and make all these new companies coming in part of their community and have an ownership in it. And there's some really smart ranchers working on this, and they've convinced me that then you get them to have ownership in it, and then you really have something to fire, because they don't bring in the one minimum truck that they need. Suddenly their employees, because they live there, they want a truck stationed at their house. They want to be at the meetings and all the things that make rural fire districts work. That's probably the number one thing that I think that I've seen to make them better. The ranches better. You have this fire protection.
So to add to that community, and this is for anybody, are you seeing much support from local rural government by bringing in those contracting crews and increase the tax base and otherwise low populated area?
I would say it fits with American politics currently. There is no one in the middle. Either they believe that you will only be bringing in the spawn of Satan, or they go, wow, you just funded our schools for 30 years. And it seems like there are no projects where anybody's like, well, this will be better because we have a business that has money. It's everybody can look the other guy to lose, right?
Yeah, so to help us understand that, how many people come in to the project? How many people are brought in to like 1,000 acres of wind power? Is there a big boost to the local economy?
Yeah, there can be a big boost to local economy, and it's really a factor to scale the project. We generally do things on a larger scale, so 1,000 acres, I'm not sure I have great perception for that, but I mean, we're 50,000 acres. Yeah, 50,000 acres, then you're talking in the tens of millions of dollars of tax revenue for these local jurisdictions, state jurisdictions. Many states taxing setups have it such that they're dispersed in many times similar ways as property taxes. So they're going to the county general coffers, going to school and reg districts, right? Local fire districts. So that's where economics come through from the facility itself. And then while these, renewables tend to not have as large of a long-term employment base as say a fossil generation plant, they are good paying jobs. They're high quality jobs.
Is there a rule of full-time employees per acre?
It's really project dependent. And it's, yeah, I mean, if you're aggregated in and around a whole bunch of different projects, if the project itself is not large enough to sustain a permanent job population itself, but perhaps there's 5 projects of smaller size in the region, sometimes that can bring in a set group, but you get one supersized project and yeah, you can have 20 long-term employees.
So in your experience, are you finding support from local government?
It's just as Jack says, I get strong opinions in both ways.
There was that one guy in the middle once at me. They ran him out.
Yeah, and I think it's, so two thought, pick up on, so a couple of things you said. One, in terms of ways to make money from the property. We almost always reserve water and gravel and say if we're going to use those on the property, they've got to be purchased from the property to the extent that they can supply what's required, and if not, then it can be purchased off property. And just again, another good source. But yeah, once it's a build it and it'll come approach. And once you get a little bit of infrastructure in, other stuff just follow. I mean, transmission line. So now they build that, you're like, oh, they're building a transmission line through the middle of our ranch, and nothing's here. And all of a sudden, they see, 5 years later, now you've got solar and wind, and because you're there, then battery storage comes. And then you said, now you're starting all these small businesses, which is need opportunities. So yeah, they definitely compounding effect. But then two, I see sometimes, and y'all probably seen this, is landowners will, and somewhere along the way, it might start off as a good relationship, but it starts falling apart, and they don't have these good opportunities like y'all talked about working together. It gets completely adversarial, and it's like, wait, the power companies or the wind solar company, renewable company, they're sending you a check each month or each year, and they also want to be on your property. Like, y'all need to figure out how to work this out together. You see a lot of that, just hating on the oil companies in Texas. And great, but figure out how to work together. There's a lot of opportunity and upside for everybody. Otherwise, they'll just go somewhere else.
I was just going to comment that I live on the east side of the Cascade Mountains, and foothills are often places where you have good wind. There are also places that are unbelievably valuable for housing. And we're less than 150 miles from Seattle. The pressure on landowners, especially landowners that own these large open spaces, is astronomical, because the land values are so much higher than what anything is worth, for livestock. And so a little bit of income that supplements livestock revenue for a ranch business, every ranch you consult will say that goes a long, long way to preventing them from selling out. And the Society of Range Managers and Ecosystem Services report reported that by far the biggest threat to rangelands is land conversion. And so, I mean, it's the biggest threat to habitat. It's the biggest threat to intact rangelands. If you have the opportunity for a little bit of revenue that has almost no ecological cost, and I think it's funny that we haven't even talked about birds, because I think it's a non-issue. A little bit of revenue, even if somebody's only got 2 or 3 turtles on their property, that has almost no footprint, but it saves the ranch. That has quite a lot of value.
Yeah, okay. 2 thoughts. So one, on your point about the value that the wind turbines provide, there's a wind farm next to our ranch, and we don't have turbines on us yet. Somebody, Driving around there, and this happens literally every time I take somebody out there, they see the Vista, and they go, oh gosh, I'm so sorry you've got those wind turbines, that's just horrible. I say, no, actually, I love them. See that hill next to it? That has houses on it. Those are my options. Wind turbines or houses, because we've got significant urban encroachment sprawl coming at us. It's like, that's a no-brainer. Someday I might be able to buy that property that's got the wind turbines on it, and keep ranching it. Those properties that have the houses on them in their subdivisions, one, you'll never be able to buy them and practice good range management on them. Two, they all have water wells with a couple acres worth of irrigated grass down in our aquifer that are keeping the springs flowing. So it's pretty, again, people love to hate, but you better prioritize what it is you really care about.
That gets right to one of the other questions I've had for a long time. Are conservation easements actually competitive with renewable energy? Do you find you're competing against, there's a lot of controversy whether a producer wants to see those wind towers or not. And conservation easements seems like a way that they could catch in without having to look at a wind tower all the time. Do you find that you're competing with them, or are you writing any contracts with people considering that? Is it even in the picture?
Yes, increasingly so. And so it comes back to the conservation easement. What's the basically to dumb it down is you can't destroy the conservation values. So they come out, they do a baseline report, figure out what the conservation values are to make your property unique, and we can keep it in its natural state. Once we establish those, you can do things that aren't going to basically de minimis uses that aren't going to destroy the conservation values. For example, you can still do low impact oil and gas drilling and have a conservation easement as long as you have a surface use agreement. Wind, for some reason, is very controversial. I would argue that a wind project a lot of times is no more impactful than oil and gas drilling. But there are a lot of conservation groups that say, nope, we're not going to take any land that has a wind turbine included from doing it. Now, solar, no questions asked, solar's up. But wind, it's up in the air, and I would say it just depends on what the pricing is like. What else? Definitely, you should.
So it depends.
Well, I am a retired accredited rural appraiser, so I can speak to this a little bit. And the answer is it depends on the view shed. It depends on the recreational amenities. Do you have a fishing stream? Do you have timber? Do you have elk? Elk are a big deal, because people who buy easements are interested in preserving not just the property, not just land. They're interested in preserving the unique attributes of the land. So the more your property has that is unique and or rare, special, the more competitive a conservation easement is going to be with these alternative energy companies.
View shed and recreation are more of a factor than wildlife for wildlife's sake?
No, I actually think the question was, is view shed and recreation more competitive than wildlife for wildlife's sake? And the answer is, well, the answer is always it depends. That was what my finance professor taught me in grad school until he asked me a question that I didn't know, and I said it depends. He said, unfortunately, Brad, in this case, no, it doesn't. But it depends on what kind of wildlife. Are we preserving jackrabbits? Well, they're probably not as high up on the priority scale as elk. Elk are a big deal, at least where I am. Elk are a huge deal because there's that is a wildlife amenity that can actually be turned into a cash flow. So and fish are another big deal. Elk, fish, deer, and then everything else. Other than maybe, pheasants and your small game birds, those, there's some demand for, for hunting rights there, but I think as far as wind goes, I don't think solar really impacts much of any of that. The wind may impact, I don't know if it impacts birds or not, or your game birds. I know it impacts your higher soaring birds, your birds of prey, but I just don't know. But the answer is no. Wildlife in some cases is the number one consideration.
And I would suppose if your neighbors have lots of towers around, the value of that conservation easement is already pretty low.
It affects it, yeah.
Well, I mean, your value would be, it depends. So the question was, what's the value? I'm sorry, I just said it depends. But it's an appraiser, so it's, half science, half art. Sometimes you're if you're unique and you don't have those renewables on there, well, then that sends the value to the price up. But yeah, other times if everybody around you's got renewables, you can't do it. Well, yeah, now you've seen it. It depends if the IRS is asking or a potential buyer's asking.
I know where to find the elk.
That's why I don't do appraisals anymore, is because people like you, we're doing this for the IRS, it's gotta be a different value.
Yeah, going back to your original question, I'm not sure that in most places there would be, I don't think the conservation easement and the wind project are mutually exclusive. In the one that I'm familiar with, the utility actually owns the land. It's a good deal and it worked out. And they have a conservation easement on the entire 16 sections that also has 167 turbines. And you can find the elk lying in the shadow. I've been on their technical advisory committee for 15 years. They're required to have a third party do bird mortality surveys. And the expectation was that there would be 2 per turbine. What they found was less than that. They were mostly small songbirds, not raptors. It's a different country, but pardon? Per year, yeah.
Do y'all have not per day?
What's that?
Not per day.
No, not per day. 2 per year per turbine. Your pickup, your parlor window, and your cat kill more than that
If there are migratory birds coming through there, you'll have those.
we do with the flying fire. I mean, I think this is the reason why we see less bird mortality in the west than you do in the east. I grew up in Arkansas. You've got tree canopy that goes up to 100, 120 feet. They were building smaller turbines back then. The bottom of that windswept area was right on top of the tree canopy. We've got sagebrush that tops out at 6 feet, and the bottom of the turbine, when it's at the bottom of the stroke, is like 140 feet in the air. So you've got a lot of airspace, which is where most of the songbirds travel, that isn't occupied. Further north, you've also got a lot of spacing between the turbines. There's a lot of airspace there. It just doesn't seem to be an issue for raptors.
So in our last few minutes, before I ask the panel to summarize their thoughts on renewable energy, I need to take a minute to thank our sponsors, not only for this panel, but for the entire SRM conference, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, and NRCS, who also is a contributor to the Good Grazing Makes Sense, as well as Magic Valley Energy. I want to thank all those who put this together today, and then turn it over one last time to the panelists for their final thoughts on renewable energy. Good one, man.
So we were touching on, I think a theme that was underlying a lot of the conversation was, what are the potential synergies? Where's the common ground? Where can we find values that align between the different parties. And I just want to put, this didn't come up too much this afternoon, which is fine, but I want to acknowledge the potential for both wind or solar systems to incorporate and maintain agricultural value. So it's not a either or. There are a lot of models out there, lots of people working on finding that multi-value system as opposed to having to forfeit one use over another. So I just want to, and that's my thought on that.
Just a quick comment about, I mentioned that I think a diversity of revenue streams for a ranch is really critical for financial resiliency. It seems like we see the same thing in energy. In the Pacific Northwest, we have hydropower. We've got a fair bit of wind energy. There's a little bit of solar coming on. And you know, the wind blows a lot. But of course, the times when you have peak power demand is sometimes when the wind stops. But because it's tied to, you know, I guess what the engineers call base power, you know, when wind turbines slow down, then they turn on hydropower and fill it in. And we're able to keep more water behind the dams, you know, keep more water higher in the watershed in the Columbia and Snake Rivers when you've got wind turbines running, because you can shut down the hydropower generation. The two seem to work well together pretty well. And it's been good for water storage, good for irrigators, and good for managing power demand. It seems to be working pretty well.
I think it's a lot of opportunities and you just got to prioritize. I see a lot of people get sort of stuck in a quagmire. Figure out what's important to you on your property and line it out. And then you can determine if the project's right for you or not. But as you said, it's certainly, you know, when done right, it's a great tool to have.
When done right.
That's very good.
Now, you know, we've spent most of this session speaking toward interactions with the private landowner, the private rancher, private ag family. Something else to keep in mind, and much of this can translate to public lands, right? You can't throw a rock without hitting public land out west here. We're starting to see, at least through my lens, most of the premier renewable sites for wind and solar on private are starting to be gobbled up. You're going to start seeing more and more proposals on public lands. Doesn't mean that it's a complete lose situation for the grazing permittees, whoever's utilizing those allotments. There's opportunities there if you sit down and have a good partner with your energy producer to come up with what are those, as Jack mentioned, what are those actions that you've had in mind for your allotment that has been difficult to get through permitting, whether a financial reason or just, you know, agency staffing or other constraints, where you have somebody like an energy company that's going through the process that can incorporate correct road placement, correct fence placement, trough sites to ensure cows are away from the infrastructure and construction, cattle guards, you name it, correct reseeding. Work with those companies, because if you're working with a good company, you'll be able to incorporate some of your own objectives so that at the end of the day, something that you've envisioned for your allotment can be there in place because of what that other energy company is doing. So I'd invite just instead of an outright no, explore it with these entities to see if it's possible, because oftentimes there's a lot of it possible.
Make sure you get the EIS for that talking about.
That's right.
On rangelands, you know, it'd be really neat if there was no coal, there's no wind, there's no anything. There's just grazing, you know, no fence. We were to the whatever 1840s, and the first guys bring cows in here, with the gold rush. But the reality is, people want electricity, and the great push in the 80s to say we're going to save and produce less electricity in the United States or around the world didn't work. People love electricity. And the reality of it is the people who don't live on rangelands love the most electricity. I mean, farmers, I guess, is it's not hurting them to have energy development on rangelands, to live on the coast, and it doesn't hurt them to say, I want all mine to be from wind or solar. go find a way to do it. So those of us who live here are the ones that have to find a way to do it. And there's a bit of inevitability to it. What, sort of how I got to working in it. If it's gonna be inevitable, then how do we make it so we come out better than we are? And how do we go find the partners? I think most consultants are first brought into it because there's a fly by night shady person getting involved. And somebody's like, how do you protect me from them? And then what you hope is you do a good job, and then the responsible companies come to you. And I like to think I'm one of the consultants that was good. They come to you and say, hey, people liked what you did. How can you make ranches better? And one of the things that I found a bunch of times is they go, that's an insignificant cost to us. For us to put up good gate instead of a crummy gate, the margin on that is nothing. We'll put in good gates. We didn't know the difference. Oh, we can put in a good cattle guard for $400 extra. Well, of course we're going to put in a good cattle guard. And the other one, in fact, this just came up last week, is yeah, we're going to tear your cattle guard up. We'll put in a brand new one with God. So you get two cattle. Right. You're going to have the construction cattle guard, and then you're going to have the ranch cattle guard. So the energy companies are coming to rangelands, and they have been since Spindletop. It's just a difference that energy companies is we can either welcome them as partners, or we can have a fight. And if you're going to fight against somebody who has a lot more money than you, better be tough. So the big advantage is the ability for them to do reseeding treatments and fight fires dwarfs what one individual rancher can do. And if you can have the people who work for the wind company be part of your rural community, then you have an ally who has the same values you do. So you've got to figure out how you work so you're not being driven by somebody from Los Angeles figuring out how to graze cows, teach you where they're
Last word for it.
deciding where those sage routes should be.
Right.
They were wrong.
I agree, Jack, they were wrong. Because they disagreed with me. So, you know, we talk about land a lot because we all feel like we're connected to the land. In reality, sometimes it owns us more than we own it. And that's not a healthy thing. Assuming that you have a choice. So assuming that all your neighbors aren't climbing on and you're going to be the only one left out, then you have a choice whether there's development going up, then these are the things to think of. First of all, always hire an attorney and some sort of someone like Jack, a range consultant who has been through this before, because they have experience in this that you don't. Second, decide what you want to do. Do you want to be a rancher? Do you want to run cows? Is that your passion? If that's your passion and financial security comes through renewable energy, then climb on board. If like a lot of people, your land in your retirement, you plan to either sell it to your kids or to some young person or something when they're picking out your nursing home, then you have to consider what the effect of any project is going to be on the value of your property. Because now you're starting to talk about the trade-off between dollars later from increased property value for your retirement versus dollars now. So decide what your goals are for your land. I can confidently say that I've never seen a project that interferes with ranching. If you pay any attention at all to it. So it's not like it's gonna keep you from running your cows. The question then is, do you wanna keep your view? And if you can't control your view, because someone else owns the hill where everybody is gonna build in the future, then a wind farm is a great idea. Because I'd rather look at windmills and houses. Those are the considerations that come into play for me, as a rancher. It's what's my goal? And my goal is to run cows. I don't see a lot of people moving. Jack, you see a lot of people moving to my ranch to subdivide? Probably not gonna happen. And so, my goal is to make sure the ecosystem's healthy, and make sure that I have healthy rangeland, so it's productive for me and generations in the future, because that's what I feel like is best for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Brett. Before we disband, I want to give one last thank you to Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, NRCS, and in turn, specifically for this, thanks to Good Grazing Makes Sense and Magic Valley Energy. I heard it a lot today, but I always heard it followed up with a really honest answer, and I really appreciate this panel's honesty, openness about that's on record. It's pretty controversial, and your participation on participating in this. Thank you. Thank you for having me.